Hi everyone, you're watching the Wild Monday Collective webinar series for people tackling the impact of stress on performance at a team or organisational level. This series is a practical, honest, human approach to some of the biggest issues facing our workplaces. Today, Dr. Rachel Morris and I are talking about how to help your team proactively manage their own workload. One of the biggest stresses at work is the feeling of overwhelm, too many things to do, not enough time, and that feeling of spinning plates. And under the pressure of budget and deadlines, this can feel excruciating, not least because many people feel they don't have any control over what tips into their inbox, except that they do. And one of the great skills you can teach your team is how to take proactive control over their work and therefore their stress levels and productivity. And here to help you do that today is Dr. Rachel Morris, founder of Wild Monday. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Carrie. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. So can you help us to understand how we can teach people that skill of managing their own workload and stress levels?
Okay, so thank you for joining us, everybody. And today we're going to talk about actually how managers can help people with the skills. And I've done a lot of coaching and team coaching for resilience within organisations, and worked out that there are a few very concrete, very tangible things that we can do to help people with these sorts of things. So today I'm going to focus on one of the models that I use, and that is the prioritisation matrix. And I find that this is a really, really powerful way of helping people individually manage their own workload, but also for managers to help their teams do it as well.
Great.
So I thought I'd just go into a little bit of a background before I launch into the shape, if that's okay. You know, I've been interviewing quite a lot of people recently about stress and burnout and how they're feeling and actually what would help them. And again, people tell me that they're just feeling like a hamster on a wheel.
Yep.
Constantly going around. Does that ring a bell with you, Kerry?
Yep.
Just, you know, working as hard as they can just to stay still. You know, you're exhausted after a day, and then you get home, you've just got to do it all again. And it's quite interesting how it's not just people in the NHS that feel like this, it's people in all organisations around. So I think this is a very, very common thing for people who are busy, who are professionals, maybe work in high stress jobs, particularly in knowledge industries and things like that, with more and more demands being put on us. And actually, the feeling is that there's fewer and fewer resources. And this is also backed up by a study that came out in the FT, that people report that they feel that they are working very hard all or almost all the time. The number that report that has gone up significantly in the last 10, 15 years. So I looked at this graph and thought, that's really odd, because actually productivity is down. So we think we're working harder and harder than ever, but we're actually being less and less productive than ever. I think there's obviously a number of reasons for this. I think the huge demand for our attention, social media, our phones and things has got a huge part to play in this. But I think it's quite helpful to understand what happens when we're under increasing pressure. And I talk about this curve in all of my webinars. I don't make any apology for it, because I think it's really important for us to grasp what happens when we're under increasing pressure, because this graph is called the stress curve, or the Yerkes-Dodson curve, and it shows what happens to our performance under increasing pressure. And we all know we need some pressure to perform. I know that I need short deadlines to make it, but very soon the pressure just builds up and up and up, and suddenly you get to this point of peak pressure. And unfortunately, if the pressure gets even higher, we don't keep getting better and better and performing better. We often tip over the top of the curve, our performance starts to go down, and it's long until our performance really, really drops. So we may remark that we're busier and busier and busier, but actually what's happening is that our performance is going down and down and down. Does that ring a bell with you, Kerry?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that that point where the curve starts to go down can creep up on you quite suddenly, and usually you're heading down it for some time before you realize that's where you are.
Yeah, and I think also colleagues, you know, we're in a very good place to spot this in our team members, and managers often ask me, you know, how do I spot it when people are just tipping over the top? Well, often it's the team members that will spot it for each other first, but actually this curve is quite a good thing to use as a manager, and just get people to rate where they think they are on it, and that will give you quite a good idea about how under it and how under demand or over scheduled people are feeling. And I think the neuroscience behind it is quite interesting, in that, you know, when we do feel we're under pressure, when more and more stuff is happening, we get increased cortisol, our prefrontal cortexes shrink, and that's the bit that makes decisions and lays down memory. So we start forgetting things, we don't make very good decisions. Our hippocampuses don't work very well. We find it very difficult to emotionally regulate. And then, of course, under increased stress, so under increased demand, and when you're busier and busier and busier, our amygdalas increase in size. And the amygdala, I've said this before, is not a very helpful part of our body. It kept us very safe when we were living in caves, because it's our threat detection system. So it will detect if we're about to be eaten by a bear, or if we're about to be thrown out of the tribe, because that will cause us almost certain death. So the biological drive to be liked by our friends and family is really, really strong. But the problem is our amygdalas have not adapted very well to our current circumstances, to living in the 2019, and we end up having the same sort of reaction to a difficult email or increasing workload as we would do as if we were just about to be hit by a bus or eaten by a bear. And I always say we need to learn to be a little bit more gazelle, because a gazelle, when something happens, it will respond appropriately. Its threat detection system will kick in and it will run off when a lion comes. But then when that threat has gone, it will be able to just calm down and go back to eating grass. So get back into that logical place where they can use their logical brains. The problem is with us, when we're under increasing, when we get loads and loads of work, when we've got really short deadlines, when all this stuff is happening, we find it very difficult to get out of our fight or flight zone. And when we're in our flight or flight zone, we're really quite unproductive. We find it very difficult to make decisions unless it's very black and white, and we find it very, very difficult to be creative. So I think under increasing pressure and increasing workload, something happens to people's brains where they are constantly in this fight or flight or freeze zone, and they're not able to do their good work. So I think it's really important that organisations recognise this, and no matter how sort of resilient someone can be, if they are in an organisation which is constantly putting more and more and more and more demands on them, then actually they will end up burning out or leaving, even if they are very resilient and well and take a lot of care of themselves. Does that sort of ring true for you, Carrie? Have you seen this happening?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Okay, so I think we can self-sabotage ourselves in all of this, because I think when the work builds up and we get busier and busier and busier, often the first thing we stop doing is that thing that really looks after us. So for example, when the work builds up for me, I had a really, really busy week last week, actually. I was doing lots of things, and I was just, the first thing that went for me was exercise. I didn't have time to go to the gym and do some exercise. And by the end of the week, I was utterly exhausted. And so the more exhausted I got, the less I wanted to go and do any exercise, but then I wasn't sleeping very well. And I realized that I started to go down this vortex of busyness. And of course, I know full well if I'd made the time to go and do the exercise, I probably would have been a lot more productive and had more energy at the end of the week. So it can be really a vicious cycle. And I often ask people to write down the first thing that they stop doing when the work builds up and up and up. And then they rate it between 1 and 3 on how important it is for their mental and physical well-being. And often people rate this as a 3 as very, very important to their physical and mental well-being. It could be connecting with friends, going to the gym. It could be, you know, just sitting down and reading a book. It could be meditating or something like that. But often it's this that just disappears. And so we then end up going down the spiral. And it's really, really important to identify when we're doing this and to reverse it and really pay attention to the ways to well-being. And if you want to hear a little bit more about those ways to well-being, we discussed them in a previous webinar about a sane and validated way of reducing stress. So check that one out and you can have more information about that. So I think there are a lot of things that can cause us to go down the vortex of busyness. And I think a lot of them actually we heap on ourselves. But I think organisations have a responsibility in this. So we can't just say, well, it's all up to my team, they need to sort it out. But the Health and Safety Executive are very clear that there are these sort of 6 causes of stress. And this has been adapted from the Health and Safety Executive causes of stress. And I think at the real top of this is the demands that we place on people, the work overload, working conditions, and time pressure. And I think the problem is, in today's sort of VUCA environment, places have to sort of put these demands on people because they are being squeezed. We've got to, it's very uncertain. We've got possibility of Brexit. We don't really know what things are going to be like in the future. And, with increased automation and things like that, there are very legitimate reasons that organisations are having to maybe put more demands on people. But I think that managers have an absolutely key role here in being able to help people, because they are the people, they are sort of the middle bit of the funnel between the organisation at the top and then the teams at the bottom, and they're in an absolutely key position to do this. And I think sometimes that managers just feel that they either don't have the tools, or they don't have enough resources, or maybe it's not their job, or even actually they're too busy themselves to be able to help their teams with that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of this feels like it goes against the grain of the narrative we have at work, which is work harder, we accepting that change is happening all the time to us, that we have no choice but to respond to what the organisation demands of us, people being asked to reapply for their jobs, constant reorganisation. All the cues we get from our organisations are often that change is out of our hands, and we end up so busy that we haven't even got time to take responsibility for our own workload, let alone for our teams. So I guess my question for you would be, what can people do if they want to take charge of their workload?
Well, I think there's quite a simple tool that I use that can really help shine some light on what's going on. Now, this tool won't sort of cure everything for you, but it will help make certain things really obvious, and it'll help you take more control over your own workload, but also your team's workload. But before I talk about this, just want to say there are a couple of problems with time management, because I think if you Google time management, you'll get over 40,000 hits, and there's so much being written about it. A lot of it not particularly helpful, because a lot of it focuses on scheduling. So using your diaries to schedule in everything in order to become more efficient and more productive. But this doesn't work on all sorts of levels. Firstly, because people are human beings. And so if you're just sort of scheduling people in sort of 10-minute slots, and what happens if that conversation just takes you a little bit longer, or this crisis comes up? So just getting really, really good scheduling system, while that can be helpful, isn't enough. And I think what we need to be able to focus on is prioritization rather than scheduling. Because when I coach teams around this model, and when I do lots of one-to-one coaching, actually particularly in the one-to-one coaching, within about 5 minutes, often the person I'm coaching says, look, I really need to work on my time management. It's a real issue for me. And often after about 2 minutes of talking to them, I realize the problem really isn't time management. They just have too much work to do in the time they've got available. And there's no amount of coaching is going to solve it's going to allow them to get through it. What they need to be doing is working out what their key priorities are, and then getting rid of stuff and being able to maintain some focus. So for me, this tool is all about being able to focus on what's really important, prioritize, and then get rid of some stuff.
Got it. So how does it work? It looks familiar.
Yeah, this is how it works. And many of you will have seen this before, because it's based on the Eisenhower the Eisenhower urgent important grid. So you basically draw an urgent important grid. In the top row, you've got the important stuff, and the bottom row, you've got the non-important stuff. And on the left column, you've got urgent, and the right-hand column, you've got non-urgent. So it's a simple 4x4 matrix. And I encourage people to spend a couple of minutes doing a brain dump into this urgent important matrix and be able to put all the stuff that comes up in a usual day. And so if you're watching this webinar on record, you might want to pause it and do it yourself, or if anyone's watching this now, to actually draw an urgent important grid yourself. And I tend to do this every day when I'm planning my work. And so in the first box, now this is the one that is really, really easy to fill in, and that is the urgent and important box. And I just did a quick sort of brain dump here about things that tend to happen, that come up and people experience as urgent and important. So things like staff emergencies or customer inquiries or complaints. People experience deadlines as urgent, and then often you've got emergency meetings or troubleshooting, things like that. And when I've been doing this with doctors, obviously there's a lot of patient care that is urgent, but often a lot of this urgent stuff is scheduled in, so you actually have the time to do that. And this box often is the biggest box, and everything tends to go in there. And the next box, which we look at, is the urgent box, but it's not important. So this includes emails, can include emails, requests for information, or generating reports for other people. So it might be important for other people, but not necessarily for you. Maybe some staff requests or reading newsletters. And often you've been CC'd into emails just a little bit lazily by somebody else, and you're not quite sure what you need to be doing with them. So this box is stuff that's not particularly important to you. It may perhaps be important to other people, but not to you. Then the third box is this non-urgent, not important box. And this is what people have problems filling in. And this is something that I've put in there. So perhaps checking Facebook or Instagram, or filing some emails, or some of those emails that are the reply to all emails, just like completely take up some time reading, but you realise you didn't need to look at them at all. Or occasionally people might say, well, actually all those informal chats with my colleagues they should be in the not urgent, not important. And I have seen that put in there before. And then finally, into the not urgent but important box, you've got these things like strategy, maybe your finances and invoicing, maybe planning your time off and your holiday. What about your career development, networking, and also fitness, well-being, and health? Is there anything else you'd put in that important but not urgent box, Carrie?
Yeah, I put things in there which are which prevent things becoming urgent. So it perhaps would come under strategy and planning, but things like looking at and improving some of the ways that I or my team or whoever work, such that there are fewer staff emergencies and fewer complaints. But I don't quite know how to describe those.
So things like improving processes.
Yeah, although I'm not big on the word process, imagine. But essentially, yes.
Yes. So things that basically will help stuff stop popping over into the urgent and important box. So an example from me, I was constantly up till about 3 a.m. preparing the stuff for my appraisal. It had to be in the next day. And I've known about this for a year. I'm constantly doing it urgently, when actually something I could have put in my not urgent but important box was to download an app and to be able to document my learning as I went along. So by the time I was submitting it, it was all just there. But actually it took a bit of time to sort out and to work out what app I was going to use and how I was going to use it and how I was going to document it. But that's an hour sorting that out saved me 6 hours of something cropping up urgently and importantly. And there's so many examples that people can come across. When I first started using this matrix, I was doing it completely wrong, because I found that actually most things in my life were urgent and important, and then things I like to do, like actually those informal chats with colleagues I was just talking about, actually should be there. Okay, so the things in my life often started off in the not urgent but important box, but pinged into urgent important just because I hadn't got round to doing them. And the things that are really important, like maybe going to the gym, were sat there in the not urgent and the not important box, but actually they were really, really important to me. So you can start to see the importance of this box here, the not important, sorry, it's a bit of a tongue twister, the not urgent but important box.
Yeah.
And this is where your power lies.
Yeah, yeah.
particularly though, in that you said, Carrie, you know, figuring out ways to keep clients happy, to make sure that things are automated, that you're not missing stuff. You know, it's really taking control over those things that you can take control over. And I think I just wanted to mention the zone of power again, because I think it's so important. And you know, imagine that this blue slide is everything in my life, but that circle there, that is what I can control in my life. So I can control what I ate for breakfast. I can't control what my children ate for breakfast, but I can control what cereals I have in the house potentially. So if I act within my zone of power and know the difference between what I am in control of and what I'm not in control of, I will be much less stressed. Because often people that get very stressed are focusing all those things that they can't control. So often with workload, it's, oh, I've just got so much workload, it's too much, I'm not going to be able to do it. Well, actually, what we need to do is focus on what you can control. So actually think about what is in that box and when you can do it and what you can prioritize and what you can get rid of.
So it sounds like the things, we started with this list of enormous list of things that are urgent and important. And if I look at my to-do list, which sort of gets longer and more strangled every day, most of those things will be very hard to kind of take them out of important or urgent. Mm-hmm. But that the source of them is the source of reducing that pool of things that we feel are out of our control because now they have to be done and they are important, is to spend more time in our zone of power planning how to work in such a way that fewer things end up suddenly urgent and important, which sounds obvious, and yet it's not, is it?
I think it's one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah.
Spend that time in that quadrant, because when you've got a list of 20 urgent important things, you just have to do it now. You have to do it. And I think the problem with most of us is that we just constantly doing things that need to be done now. It's a very inefficient way of working, because often when we're in that urgent important box, we are in our amygdala fight or flight zone, and we're doing things super fast and maybe not particularly well, and maybe being a bit short with people on email and reacting a little bit badly to stuff. Whereas if we'd have been able to plan it out in advance and take a step back and think about how you can do it a little bit more creatively, it would have been so much better.
So I'm wondering whether the urgent important list gives a few clues to things that need to be better planned. So it itself is a source of insight into where perhaps more planning or more doing more things within your control would prevent those things in the future.
I think so. And I think when you do this with teams, it's really obvious. There's a few things that come up again and again and again. One of these is meetings, for example. So people spend a lot of time in urgent meetings, and some people spend their entire time in meetings. And that because they haven't got the meetings right, or the things have slipped within an organisation. So people end up doing the work in the meetings. No one's read any minutes. It ends up just being a general chit chat. People arrive late because they've had back to back meetings. And then the meeting overruns and you don't get any decisions done. And so you just have another meeting where you sort of do it all over again. And you end up being in urgent meetings because you didn't get the stuff sorted out in the meeting that you needed to be in. So if you take that as an example, then actually what teams then say is, right, well, we're going to put aside some time in the non-urgent but important box to work out how we do meetings properly, to work out that we always have an agenda, that we work out how we're going to chair these properly, or how we're going to run them and make sure everybody knows about it, and etc. So you then start to reduce the time of meetings. But this isn't going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen unless someone does something about it. So it's a really good indication of where time is just being wasted and time is going. But I think it's one thing for me to say, just do this now and plan to do this. It's like, well, where are we going to get that time to plan to do, it's for planning? And I think there's a couple of different ways that we can get this extra time. Firstly is by either delegating or getting rid of stuff that's not important. And there's been some studies that show that actually we spend up to 40% of our time at work doing stuff in those two bottom boxes that's not
Gosh,
important. 40%, it's quite
terrifying.
it's terrifying and
Quite
incredible.
depressing, given how carefully we're all managing our to-do lists.
I know. And they even looked at people like paramedics, and it was something like 25% of their time is doing not important stuff. So, we don't have control over everything, and I get that. But what if we could just lose 10% of that stuff that wasn't important? Well, that would give us just 10% more time. And the idea is actually that if it's urgent and not important, but maybe important to somebody else, then we can delegate it. And I don't think we use delegating enough, because delegating takes time, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You can't just go, right, you do it. Actually, it's like, I've got to then train that person how to do it. I'm losing a little bit of control over it. It's going to take me time to write down a protocol, or to, I'm going to have to check up on it, etc., etc. Sometimes people just say, easier to do it myself. But of course it is. It's easier and quicker to do it yourself if you only have to do it once.
Yeah.
If you have to do it 10 times, then it might be easy to do it yourself, but actually if you'd taken that time to train. So if you're going to try and delegate stuff, then you're going to have to put something into that not urgent but important box. You're going to have to plan how to delegate that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And the getting rid of stuff, well, people say, well, I can't get rid of it. Well, okay, if you can't get rid of it, then it's in the wrong box to start off with.
Yeah.
Then it must be important. Actually, it probably needed to have been up in that not urgent but important box.
One of the things that's occurring to me is when I've got a lot of urgent important things in the urgent important box, I think some of those things in the not important, not urgent box I use as a distraction. So I wonder if my amygdala is firing away, and it's actually taking me off course and sending me to total distraction activities.
Yeah, I think that's where we sort of go for the quick wins, or even the distractions. And maybe at that point, it's really important to schedule in some breaks, because actually your amygdala is telling you to be distracted, then probably you need to be distracted by something.
Yeah, but maybe not Instagram.
Maybe not. Maybe you just need to get out and go for a walk around the block and get into nature and then get back, or something like that. But I mean, the distractions are so toxic to our work, because there's this whole piece of work around focus, and if you are doing some deep work and you get distracted, it takes you 23 minutes to get back into that deep work again. That's a phenomenal amount of time. And when I'm talking distractions, I'm not talking about someone coming to the door. I'm talking about emails popping up in the corner of your screen, or WhatsApp messages flashing on your phone. I mean, it's just little things. And unfortunately, our brains are distraction-seeking heat missiles, because we are wired for these distractions. We get these tiny little things of dopamine when we see we've got a WhatsApp message or someone's liked a post that we've done. And so we're just trying to see that all the time, but it's just not good for our productivity, and it's really, really not good for our focus. So one of the main things I tell people is turn off your email alerts on your computer, because they're probably causing you, they're just focusing your mental energy somewhere else. And not often that you have to respond absolutely immediately to an email. I often think people will phone you or come and find you if something is that important. And I know that not everybody, can have that attitude about email, but even giving yourself half an hour between checking emails would be more helpful, I think. So trying to get rid of stuff that you can get rid of, trying to get rid of as much distraction as you can. So for example, you might need to train staff to generate those reports that keep cropping up. You could develop a frequently asked questions sheet for all those repeated queries that come in, and maybe you want to develop and agree some email rules, so you're not being emailed all the time with other people's stuff that they can't be bothered to sort of decide who to send it to, so they just send it to everybody. And so you might find that your not urgent important box starts to look like this.
Yeah.
Which again, that's quite a lot, isn't it? You go, that's quite a lot of stuff I need to do. And this is where it becomes really important to start prioritizing. And I think this is where the managers can really, really help their teams to do that. And I think it's probably going to be quite eye-opening for managers to sit and look at what their their team member think are the really important stuff, because it might be completely different from what you have in your mind. So even just to sit down and go, you know what, those 3 things for me, that's really important that you do that. Those 2, that's great, but actually that can wait. And so you then manage to get a list of those really important stuff that no one's shouting for, but the things that can be their main focus over the next couple of days.
I've started to do a few things in this area, and so some of them I've done for a few years and some of them more recently. But one of them, for example, is every time I schedule a meeting, I schedule 20 minutes after that in my calendar as well, or whatever, depending if it's face-to-face, whatever the right amount of time is, to do the follow-up work. And I find that usually halves the amount of time it takes to do that follow-up work, whatever I've said I'll do in the meeting, for example, sending people things, but also it keeps it in the not urgent box. It keeps me doing it in the not urgent box and stops me processing it in my to-do list over and over again until it becomes urgent. And I think every time I feel a bit of pain in that sense that I'm always doing this, like things I need to do every month, like invoicing, that pain, thinking, well, that's a signal that there's something I need to do in the not urgent important box that will help me avoid that in the future, and having the discipline to do that and to follow through with it. That's made a really big difference.
Absolutely. It's just sort of noticing those signals. I think your point about doing something there and then is really important. I remember when I was training as a GP, my trainer, he gave me some brilliant advice. He said, do your referral letters as you go. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't have time to do that. I've got these patients coming in. But actually, I'd just seen the patient. Everything was fresh in my brain. It took me 30 seconds to then just dictate the letter that I needed to dictate. And then I could get on, and it's just been done. Whereas if I had to go back to it, had to look up what I was talking, look at the notes again and decide what the main points were and everything. So it took me twice as long if I'd have just left it.
Yeah.
I think that's a brilliant idea for meetings. And I have heard people started to book, rather than hour-long meetings, they always book now 45-minute meetings. So it gives them that buffer time. And I think buffering space is really, really, really important. And also the point about the pain that you feel. I was doing some paperwork last night. I was thinking, why have I just spent an hour doing that? And so top of my list is, get an assistant to do some of the stuff. And that's going to take a while. I'm going to have to research it and find someone. But I think once I started doing that, I definitely won't regret it. But it's just putting that time aside to do that work when nobody is shouting for it. So I think there are questions that managers can ask their teams, and that's this. I'd get them to have a look at a couple of things that are cropping up in urgent, important, that you have some control over, and then think about what can you do. So for me, it would be, actually, I'm having to do this paperwork. I have control over getting someone in to help me for a bit. So what do I need to plan to do in my not urgent, important box? I need to research who I could get. I need to sort of get some references. I need to do some interviews. I need to plan to do that, but that's me taking control of what I can take control of. And there are many, many examples and things I think that people can already think of probably that they could do. And then the next question I would be asking as a manager is, then how can you maximize the time that you spend in that box? So how are you going to do that? Because often people are working in open plan offices, they're being constantly disturbed at work. So often they need to think about, well, I'm going to go and sit in this meeting room and work so that people don't disturb me, or I'm going to put an auto response to my email. And there was a great article by the Harvard Business Review actually about auto response on your email, saying we're not using it right. We could use it as a really useful tool to say, today I'm really focusing on this project and I'll get back to you tomorrow. So it actually lets people know what you're doing as well. So give yourself some time without distraction where people can't find you. And probably the biggest distraction is yourself. So make sure that you're turning off your email alerts, but also block out time in your diary and treat that as a sort of very sacred meeting with yourself. Because otherwise, and I'm dreadful for doing this. If I've blocked off a day to work on some content, and then someone says, oh, can we just have a quick chat or a phone call? I'll be, oh yeah. And actually that's the time that when I'm doing the really important deep work. So blocking it off and finding some time to do it. And I also talk to people about finding the time where you work best. So I know I do my best work probably in the morning, or certainly first thing in the morning, and then after lunch I lose a bit of focus. So for me, I tend to answer my emails in the afternoon and deal with little tasks in the afternoon where I don't need to focus so much. But if I'm going to write something like a presentation or do something, actually first thing in the morning is best for me. And so I'll skim the emails to make sure there's nothing urgent, and then turn everything off and not answer those emails and just get on with the work. So knowing yourself and knowing when you work best, I think is really important. When do you work best,
Well,
Kerry?
yeah, I do the opposite. So I find it very hard to do deep work in the morning when I know there are lots of little things I need to do. So and people I need to respond to, and so what I do is block out the afternoon and then spend the morning powering through smallish things, getting those ticked off, and then feeling like really I've got the rest of the day, and now I can focus. Yeah, I find it hard to concentrate when there are small things on my to-do list, but that's just me.
Yeah. So absolutely. So I think it's really understanding yourself. And the more one can understand oneself, then schedule. And we're all adults. We can all tell people what we need and what we do. And I think as a manager, if you can ask your teams, when do you work best? How are we going to get you time to focus on your not urgent but important quadrant? Does that mean working from home? Does that mean working somewhere else? Does that mean changing your working hours? How flexible can we be to allow you to do your best work, and how as a team are we going to minimize the distractions with each other? And I think this is a balancing act, because there is evidence that say informal interactions at work are really, really important. So could you, for example, just say, okay, the morning is deep work, and then from 1 o'clock till 3 o'clock, that's our chat and asking each other questions time, and so we can have all these interactions there, and then we're going to get another hour of work done before we go home. So what can you agree as a team that's going to help people?
There's a lot to be said for the humble tea break, and I'm here in the engineering department at the University of Cambridge at the moment, and it's full of people juggling multiple priorities. So academics who've got a teaching workload, a research workload, probably doing quite a lot of consultancy as well, and all the myriad of informal things they get involved in. But the department put on a proper coffee, great big vat of it, every single morning from 10 o'clock, encouraging people to come and take a tea break together. And in my team, they're pretty religious about it. So not everybody goes every day, but some people there'll be somebody going every single day. And in those informal conversations, we have make incredible connections, breakthroughs, and certainly my work has often taken a great big leap forward through a sort of casual conversation over tea with somebody.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think, it's always these casual conversations that you have with people. Suddenly someone gives you different perspectives on something. You think, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. Or someone else says, oh, you should talk to so-and-so because they're working on that. And you go, oh, that sounds interesting. Or someone recommends a book or something. Really, really important. And, just from the well-being perspective as well, having friends at work is really, really important. So, enabling your team to meet up informally is, I think, a really important job for a manager. And interestingly, we were doing some of the ways to wellbeing and talking about connecting at work with the team, and they were talking about, this girl was talking about how she'd been moved to a different office, and there were lots of different people in this office, but no one really knew each other, and how it was a bit lonely. And we sort of said to her, well, what could you do? And she decided to organise a bake-off for the department every week, and a different team would cook and bring cakes in, and it just transformed the way they worked, because suddenly everyone knew each other and started to say hello, and it was just much more pleasant to be at work.
So I think what these things do is they signal when is an appropriate time to chat. So often we sit with our heads down feeling like everybody else is super busy and doesn't want to be distracted, and sometimes that's true, but these rituals, so for example, in my team, we're not constantly distracting each other and chatting outside of those times, and it's actually very quiet in the office. But if somebody gets up and goes for a cup of tea, that they're available for chatting, and that really helps balance getting that informal time together without feeling like, well, every time I come into the office, I just don't get anything done because somebody's chatting to me all day.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think as a team, one thing that you can discuss is how you're going to know when's the right time to talk to each other. And I've coached managers who just say, I really want to look like I'm available to my team. And I am, but now I get nothing done because they're constantly just talking to me. And we talked about how can they signal to their team that they are available, they're not available. And often they say, well, if I've got my headphones on, that means I'm not available. And then, I said, well, have you told them this? Oh, no. So, actually have a conversation about it. Maybe there's something you can put on your computer that says, I'm distractible or I'm not distractible. Let's have a conversation as a team so that we know, because if I want to ask you a question, I'm really happy to wait an hour if I know that you're doing something now. But if you look like you're available, I'll just ask it.
Yeah,
that might be really irritating. So I think just the more conversations you can have as a team about how you all best work and what you want to do and what are the signals that you're sending out that I'm distractible and I'm available to be disturbed, the better. Really, it's just about again taking control and saying this is how we're going to do it. And I think very small changes make a big difference.
So what else should we be doing to are the things we should be thinking about which mitigate the impact of focus on tasks on the kind of people and team side of it?
Well, I think one thing that's quite important is because we are sociable beings, and one of our main triggers for being in our fight or flight zone is when we think people aren't going to like us.
Yeah.
So we end up taking on too much because we've just been worried about saying no. And I think managers helping people say no is really important. And I love this phrase. It's about saying yes to the person but no to the task.
Yeah, nice.
Because people really worry about upsetting people if they say no, and they end up taking on stuff that A, they can't do, B, they shouldn't be doing, or C, they actually don't have the skills to do. When actually what they could have done is said no in the first place. But they've said yes because they don't want to offend people. So if you're just thinking about, actually, I'm saying yes to the person, so I'm saying, I really do want to help you. What do you need here and why are you asking me? And then think about, actually, am I the most appropriate person to do it? So should I do it or not? Is there someone who's much better placed to do it than me? Do I actually have the time to do this? Because if it's not in my priority list and I've got a million other things to do, then you probably say yes, but then you won't get round to it. So that's much worse for the person than you having said no in the first place, I think. And also, I think a lot of people are taking on stuff that really someone else should be doing. And when I teach GPs about this, we say to GPs, you know what, you're the most expensive person at this practice. So if you're doing something that someone else could be trained to do, you're wasting NHS money. So actually, if you carry on doing stuff other people could do, you're also depriving that person of a chance of learning, of being upskilled, of doing something that might make their job more interesting, of empowering them. So there's all sorts of reasons why we should be saying no and why we should delegate. But I think just being able to get out of that fight or flight zone of, they're not going to like me if I say no, and actually say to the person, I really want to help, I'm really sorry, but I can't, this is why I can't. So how can we meet this need in a different way? Is there anything else you could do instead? Or who could you talk to? Or is there anything else I could do to help you out without actually doing it? And that's a conversation I think you could have with your teams about how they're going to say no to stuff and what they're allowed to say no to, actually. Because often people think that they're not allowed to, and just condition of their work is they have to say yes to everything.
Yeah. And so tell us more about delegation.
Well, I think, I've got this definition of delegation here, which is about entrusting your authority to others so they can act and initiate independently and assume responsibility. The problem is people worry about doing it because of loss of control. It takes time. They feel guilt, like I've just been talking about, that they should be doing everything. And often people think, well, I'm not senior enough to delegate. I could only delegate if I'm a senior manager. And they also might see it as a bit of a sign of weakness. But, the more I read about time management, the more I do this with people, the more I work myself, the more I realise that being effective is about maintaining a real focus and getting rid of the stuff that we shouldn't be doing. Because the more we can focus on what we're really good at and what we should be doing, that just the more efficient and the better we're going to be.
And can the prioritization grid help us out here?
Absolutely, because I think if you've done a prioritization grid for yourself and you know what your areas of focus are and you know what your priorities are going to be, then it becomes much easier to say no to other stuff. Because if you don't know what you're going to say yes to, you don't know what you're going to say no to. So it's really important just to work that out. And a really good source of some inspiration is this book called Essentialism. Have you read this book?
I have, yes, yeah.
It's absolutely brilliant. And he talks about these sort of 3 truths of essentialism, which is all about I choose to do this. It's all about saying, you know, there's only a few things that really matter here. And I can do anything, but not everything.
But not everything.
Something I keep having to remind myself, because, you know, in the book, he talks about a businessman who had a lot of responsibility. He just sold the business. He wanted to prove that he was worth it, that he was able to work in the business still. And he just got very, very busy doing everything. And he went to see a business coach, and the business coach said, right, I only want you to go to the meetings in which you can absolutely give value, that you can contribute to, that you will give of your best, and cut out everything else. So he did that. He just stopped going to stuff just to be seen, or stopped doing stuff just to please people. He just focused on the things where he could add amazing value. And his productivity went up, his standing in the company went up, his reputation went up, all these things, because he just focused on the few important things.
And what other kind of tips and techniques do you have? Anything specific that would help people put all this into practice?
Well, I've got this sort of list of tips, and we've talked about quite a few of these. We talked about delegating, we talked a little bit about sorting out your meetings. I know that's something you're very interested in, isn't it? And, you know, how we run meetings that are going to help people. So, you know, I would encourage people to find some resources that are going to help them with just doing better, more efficient meetings. I think focusing, doing fewer things but better. We've talked about turning off distractions and including emails. We talked about doing your best work at the best time and going somewhere you can't be found. That's a particular favourite of mine. And I think, you know, one of my top tips as well is to develop your strengths, because you're much, much more effective and productive when you're working within your strengths than when you're working in areas of weakness. And I know that sounds really obvious, but we do spend a lot of time thinking about how we can develop our weaknesses. So, for example, I really don't like Excel spreadsheets. And, you know, I can use them, but not very well. And I could spend a lot of time working out how to manage them, how to do the detail on them. But with the best will in the world, I'm not that good at them, and I never will be. If I spent more time focusing on the things that I know I'm good at, then actually that will be much, much more productive than focusing on improving my weaknesses. And I think that within teams, there are all sorts of people that have different strengths. And often we don't really know. We sort of can work out, well, I think that person's quite good at that and that person's good at that. But I think teams can take some time maybe to do strength surveys or get some coaching to really understand what they're good at and what each other's top strengths are. And then maybe divide the work out so people are really focusing on the things that they're good at, and that the bulk of their work is doing that. And as a result, people will be much, much more engaged in their work. They're less likely to experience stress and anxiety. They'll be much happier. And working in the place of your strength really gets you into this thing called flow. So I think that's something else that I would really, really focus on is working towards your strengths.
And if people want more, so to know more about this topic, to work on it more deeply with you, to bring some of this into their organisation, what could they do? Well,
they could contact me. I'd love to have a chat about how this might work in their organisation. You can join the World Monday Collective, where I'm going to be sending out lots of resources and details about events and things like that. And the links are on your screen. If you'd like to have a chat with me, email me at rachel@wildmonday.co.uk. And I can also offer free lunch and learn sessions, which is sort of an hour session at lunchtime for people exploring topics like this. So I would love to speak to people about what might work in their organisation and share some more resources through the Wild Monday Collective.
And Rachel, you've shared 2 or 3 shapes from your shape collection today. Can you give us an overview of all the shapes? Tell us, show us the collection.
So this is the collection of all the shapes. And today we've talked about the stresses hexagon, the workplace stress, and we talked about the prioritisation grid, and we talked about a little bit about the vortex of busyness. And the vortex of busyness is all around well-being. We talked about the zone of power, which is all about taking control over the things you can control and not getting stressed about the things that you can't control. Getting out of the corner is a shape that helps us understand when we're in that fight or flight zone and how we get out of that and change our response to the really stressful things. And then the other couple of shapes are the coaching pentagon and the drama triangle. And these are shapes that help us realize when we're sort of taking a victim mentality about things, when we're not taking control of things, when we're expecting everyone else to rescue us, and we're casting people in different roles, and have really effective conversations with each other to turn into coaches for each other and to empower ourselves and our teams. So if you put all this together, it's really a complete toolkit that helps managers support their teams within organisations and get teams to support each other, because they're a fantastic resource for each other. So it's all about empowering managers and their teams to take the responsibility for this themselves and help them to do that.
Rachel, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining. You've been listening to the Wild Monday Collective webinar series with Dr. Rachel Morris. You can find out more about Wild Monday and Rachel's Shapes programme at www.wildmonday.co.uk. Join Rachel on Twitter, which is at Dr. Rachel Morris. And you can also follow at wild_Monday. And if you want to book a time to talk to Rachel about a situation in your organisation or anything you've heard about today, you can book that directly into her calendar using the Calendly link in the show notes. Everything we've talked about today will be in the show notes and available on YouTube shortly. Many thanks.
Thank you, Carrie.